So if you can find a seat, there are plenty of seats up here in the front that are available, so if you want to come up and make your way up here. All right, once again, good morning. My name is Manuel Velez. I am the chair of the Chicano Studies Department, and it is a great honor for me to be here to present to you. Thank you. It is a great honor for me to be here to present for you the 7th annual Gracia Molina the Pick Feminist Lecture. This has certainly become an event that is a flagship event for our department. We have brought in some amazing women to be a part of this particular event. Women such as Maria Nieto Señor, Tommy Camarillo, Sylvia Mendez, Irene Lara, and today we are going to continue with that excellent tradition by inviting Maria Garcia to come in and be a part of our presentation as well. Now, an event such as this certainly takes a lot of work, and it takes a lot of effort, not just from the Chicano Studies Department, but from the entire college altogether, and there are a lot of people that we want to thank for this. Some of the people that I'd like to thank are certainly the Pick family. Daniel Pick is here with us, and I'd like to thank him for his support and his continued presence here. I'd also like to thank the committee, the Gracia Molina the Pick committee that works to oversee the lecture series as well as the endowment. I see Olivia Puente Reynolds is here. Thank you very much for your support. Alessandra Moctezuma, who's up here in front as well, is a part of that committee. Cesar Lopez, who's not with us, is also a part of that committee as well. I'd also like to thank the college in general. Mike Ornelas, who's here with us, the former chair of the Chicano Studies Department. Vicky Chavez, who's been instrumental in the Gracia Molina the Pick lecture series. I see some of our other Chicano Studies faculty here. Olivia, nice to see you. Welcome everybody, and thank you so much for your support. Also, I'd like to thank the administration. I see Charlie Sapia is here, the dean of our department is here, some other administration is here as well. Certainly the entire college comes together as a community to support this event, and it's something that we're very proud of. In fact, what I'd like to do at the moment is invite our president, Dr. Pat Luster, to come in and give some welcoming remarks.
Thank you, Manuel, and thank you so much for all of you that are here today. It really is an honor to be here every year, and I can mark how long I've been at the institution by how many lectures we have, because this is my 7th year at Mesa, and I recall very, very clearly that first time that we all got together. And it's really exciting to still have this wonderful support from Daniel and from your family has been just remarkable, and we truly appreciate you coming each year to this when you can, and excited to have you send our messages of warmth and of gratitude to your mom when you see her the next time. I'm excited for our students to be here because these are not always opportunities we have in our classrooms every day to hear from people like you're going to hear from today. And so I'm excited that you're here. And the last thing I want to say is thank you to all the people that it takes. Manuel mentioned the group that is forming all of these wonderful relationships for us, but it takes a lot of extra time. And so if you are part of the Gracia Molina de Pick advisory group that works together, could you just stand for a moment? Could we thank you? Olivia. Nice try, but I see you back there. Thank you. It takes a lot of time and effort. So today, and as we really celebrate Women's History Month, we celebrate and stand on the shoulders of people like Gracia Molina de Pick, who are spunky and spectacular and use their voice to advance us to where we are today. So with that, I will turn it back over to Manuel, and thank you all of you for being here.
Thank you, Dr. Lester. So before we begin with our presentation on our presentation by Maria, I'd like to take a couple of minutes, first of all, to talk to you about Gracia Molina de Pick. And we also have a special presentation from Alessandra Moctezuma about a gift that we've received from Gracia, regarding Gracia as well. Let me tell you a little bit about Gracia Molina de Pick, the woman that we are here celebrating today. Gracia Molina de Pick was born in Mexico City into a family of political reformers. At age 13, she went with her aunt on Sunday visits to Frida Kahlo's home, where she also met Diego Rivera, and learned from Frida that great people are never only for themselves, but always fight for those who cannot defend themselves. This lesson helped shape her future. Gracia attended the Feminist University in Mexico City. She met Richard A. Pick, an American visiting Mexico City on business, and in 1957 they married and moved to San Diego, California. Gracia worked as a teacher and mentor to Mexican-American students in National City, co-founded Impact, a grassroots organization fighting for the civil rights of Mexican-Americans, and taught Peace Corps recruits at SDSU. As a San Diego Mesa College tenured professor, Molina de Pic developed a program that gave birth to the first Chicano Studies department in a community college. She is also the founding faculty member of what is now the Thurgood Marshall College at UCSD. Gracia's work has earned awards from numerous organizations, including the California Legislature, the California and San Diego Democratic Party, California Rural Legal Assistance, and the Centro Cultural de la Raza. In addition to the endowment made to San Diego Mesa College, she has also established an endowment fund supporting Logan Heights Branch Library and its education and literacy program. Definitely a woman who is deserving of the honor. I'm going to ask Alessandra Moctezuma now to come up and give a presentation as well.
Thank you so much. I'm very excited to be here. I'm very thrilled to have been part of the Gracia Molina de Pic committee to help bring the lectures here and also the scholarships that are given to our students. It's so wonderful also to have met her and learned from her how to support future generations and all the work that she has done. So this is a very special presentation that we have. A few years ago, I had an exhibition. I'm actually the director of the gallery here at Mesa College, besides teaching for Chicano Studies. And several years ago, I had an exhibit by an artist, local artist called Helen Redman. And Helen Redman is now in her 70s, and she's been an artist activist, and she's worked a lot to highlight the work of women artists and also to support them. And in her paintings, she talks about the role of women as nurturers, women as mothers, and also the stages of women as they age or give birth. So that's an important part of her legacy and her work. And I got to know her well when we exhibited her work. And over a week ago, she contacted me and she said, Alessandra, I have a gift that I would love to give to the college. And I was like, what is it? And she says, well, actually, I have a portrait of Gracia Molina de Pic. And I know that the college has a gallery dedicated to her. And I would like to give you this, donate this portrait to the college. So I went and picked it up on Tuesday, and I rushed around this weekend to frame it. And I want to tell you a little bit about this piece. So Helen Redman has known Gracia for many years, and this portrait was done, and maybe we can just unveil it and show it. So this portrait was done in 2005 by the artist, and it was part of a feminist celebration of Gracia's 75th birthday. You can see her handwriting in the background, so that's Gracia's handwriting, in the banner that says Primavera Feminista, Feminist Springtime. Gracia, 75 years. The painting highlights Molina de Pic's Mexican heritage, intelligent beauty, and the Primavera Springtime vitality with which she approaches life. Gracia sat for this portrait in the artist San Diego studio. So this was not done from photographs. Gracia artists actually paint where Gracia came and sat with her for several hours and days, and while they were conversing, she captured her image. The piece was a powerful part of Redman's Beauty of All series and has been exhibited at the Women's History Museum in San Diego and the Women Made Gallery in Chicago. In honor of Gracia Molina de Pic's activism and lifelong pursuit of justice, Redman wanted to give this artistic rendering to Mesa College Chicano Studies Department that she helped found. That's it.
seats up here if you guys want to.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alessandra, for that. And thank Helen very much for the painting as well. All right, without further ado, I'm going to ask Victoria Chavez to come up to take over the MCs and introduce Maria Garcia to us. Vicky?
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Wow. Okay, you guys sitting in the back, don't be afraid. Come up. There's seats all over here, you guys. Come on up. There's plenty of seats. Well, welcome, everyone. I wanted to first start with really thinking about Chicano feminism. This discussion that we're having today and this dialogue that we're talking about is really at the heart of it is Chicano feminism. And for so many people, Chicano feminism is such an idea that is foreign to them or an idea that they're not merely familiar with. And yet they may be living it on a daily basis without even realizing that they themselves are Chicano feminists. So I want to talk a little bit about what Chicano feminism is to me and then how that translates into why we're here today. So I want to begin by saying I'm a Chicano feminist first because I cannot, absolutely cannot, separate my race and my culture from my gender. I cannot place one above the other when trying to define myself. They come together in shaping how I see the world and how I understand the world. One of those factors does not exist without the others. They impact my life. My life as a woman is impacted just as much as my Chicana mindset is impacted by my race and my culture, my understanding of what it means to be a woman in our society. So if we look at what Chicano feminism is, it's really a complex set of concepts and practices. And again, it's not just the thoughts we have, but how we practice this on a daily basis. It incorporates intersectionality, which is something that we hear about, but we may not understand what intersectionality really means. What it is it's the act of claiming gender, race, ethnicity, culture simultaneously. It's also incorporating a political stance. One of the things I love about being a Chicana is no one labeled me a Chicana. If I go and I open up a form, on one day it may claim that I am Hispanic. Ugh. On another form, it may say that I'm Latina. And on another form, it may have a whole nother word. Those are terms that are applied to me, but may not resonate with me. However, Chicana, being a Chicana feminist is a very much of a place of action. It's something I claim. No one can put that on me. It's something that I live and I act upon. There's an empowerment by claiming a Chicana identity or claiming a Chicano identity. It's something that we create ourselves and how it is then shaped around our lives. Chicano feminism at its heart seeks to achieve social, political, economic equality amongst the sexes, as well as incorporating that political stance, a stance which stands in direct opposition to the evils of patriarchy. It also analyzes other forms of discrimination and disempowerment and oppression, such as racism, homophobia, class inequality. And really at the heart of our feminism, of being Chicanas, is we want to give voice to those who have been silenced. One of the things that we don't realize is that we take for granted many of the freedoms that we enjoy. Looking around and seeing the diversity of faces in here is something that always makes me feel fantastic, because I know that 50 years ago, 70 years ago, this is not the kind of diversity we would have seen in an educational setting. How did we get to a place where we can have so many voices coming forward? It's the work of those who stood up when they had been silenced and said, no más. Today we have one of those women who stood up and said, I am going to capture the voices of those who have been silenced. I am going to make sure their story and their history is preserved, and that we can use those stories to inspire us to go even further today. Today we have San Diego historian and author Maria Garcia with us. Senora Garcia is the recipient of numerous awards, two in particular that are fantastic. The first is in 2015, she received the Soho Cultural Heritage Award. And more recently, she received the Governor's Award for the Preservation of History. She is the author of La Neighbor Settlement House in Logan Heights, which we will have copies of here today. And I strongly encourage you to get your copy and get it signed. So today she will be presenting on her book and discussing the role of Chicanos here in San Diego. Remember, history is not just something that happened somewhere else, it happened here. And we are going to hear from one of those voices who saw it and has been recording it. Help me in welcoming our guest speaker, Maria Garcia.
I'd like to say thank you all for being here and explain the first slide, because it's not his story, it's history. And it's a two-thing play. It's not just about Anglo-white male making it his story, but also because I also, like Vicky, can't stand the term Hispanic, so I'm not his anything. So I kind of,
yes,
okay,
yes.
So I made it history. And as for the stories, I'm going to start with the whole story on Neighborhood House, because it was a settlement house. And it was in the middle of the community. Anything that happened in the Logan Heights community happened at Neighborhood House. Then I will talk about the boys, because I don't want you to think that the young men in the community weren't discriminated against, because they were. But if you want to talk about real discrimination, the girls, because they had their brothers on their back, their fathers on their back, and the community in general. So they faced a lot of discrimination. The reason I think these women were so ready to talk about their life is because people had not listened to them. And even the men who I spoke to, everybody said, well, you know, I have nothing to say. And 3 hours later, we would finish the interview. For someone that had nothing to say, I think that's amazing. I'm going to start with how Neighborhood House got started, because that in itself is a story. For those of you that grew up in the San Diego community, you know about, and are over 40 years old, you probably remember a store called Marston's. And let me see if I can do this right. Let me start with, this is the view from the Neighborhood House. You can see the little jacales in the background, the ocean. Probably our community of Logan Heights, which used to stretch from downtown all the way to 47th or even Euclid in those days. And where did you live? I live in the Heights. I live in Logan Heights. It wasn't Barrio Logan. And by the way, the older people do not want you to call it Barrio Logan. They will jump all over you for it. So I very politely make sure I always say Logan Heights. But this was the view in those days. This is the Neighborhood House over there, and of course another icon in our community, My Camador store, which is no longer there as well. Mary and Helen Marston. These were two very wealthy ladies, and you can have any opinion you want about wealthy women coming into the community. But if it wasn't for these two women, Neighborhood House would not exist. Whoops, I hit the wrong button. Let me go. Oops, I'm going the wrong way. Let me go back. They went, in a time they were in college, it was very fashionable to work in settlement houses. So both women worked in settlement houses. The uniqueness of the Neighborhood Settlement House is that it was on the border. The only settlement house on the border. The other one that was closed was Houston. So you know that's quite a ways from the border. So the difference being, Neighborhood House constantly had an influx of Mexicanos. It served as a, when you need a job, go to Neighborhood House. You need food, go to Neighborhood House. You want to find your primo del tío de quién sabe quién, go to Neighborhood House, okay? And so this is how it was done. Helen, the lady on your left, my right, was tried as a communist because she started the American Civil Liberties Union here in San Diego, okay? So they were held in high esteem and then not so high esteem because, you know, how dare they get involved with all these progressive things. Mr. Marston himself built this huge mansion in Balboa Park because they would sell a house to him in Mission Hills. So we all had, for different reasons, degrees of discrimination. Mary, the story is, and I don't know how factual this is, and some people tell you it is, some people tell you it's not, was that Mary fell madly in love with this man who was not considered of the statute of Mary Marston. And so she told her, now, you know, I think God would have been about the statute of Mary Marston, okay? So she told her father, if I cannot marry him, I'm never going to get married. And true to her word, she never got married. Another thing with Mary is in '87, she made a deal with the city. By that time, she was quite elderly. I think she was 80-something. And she said that her and her sisters could stay in the house and that they would turn the house over to the city of San Diego when she died. But they had to pay, they would not pay the taxes, water, gas, lights, all of that would be covered by the city. Well, you know, the city jumped on it thinking, you know, this, if you hate the, how much longer can she live? Well, she lived to be 107. Okay. So I like the idea that she got the best of them. This is the Marston department store downtown. The only thing, let me go back for a minute. What did I do wrong? Come and help me, please. Oh, here we are. The only thing I remember about the Marston store is, not that we ever could afford to buy anything there, but the smell of the perfume. And our big kick was when we went downtown to go in and go up the escalator and down the escalator. It was our Disneyland, okay? And so that's what I vividly remember about the Marston department store. This is a 1922 cooking class at Neighborhood House. Now, look at the individual burners, but I want you to really look at how the girls were dressed. I mean, you're going to a cooking class and you comb your hair with the curls and you have the stockings and the shoes. You were not going to go to cooking class and look anything but perfect. And also important to remember is most houses had wood stoves. They did not have gas. So it was a big treat to go to Neighborhood House and be able to use a gas burner. They had fiestas at the Marston house in the gardens. And these are two little kids that were dancing. I have to say this about the Marston family. They were really good at publicizing. If they asked for musical instruments, you would see the ad for musical instruments. The next thing, they would invite the same people who donated to a performance of the kids using the musical instruments. And so it went on and on. There was always a way for people to know that what they donated was being used. Again, there wasn't enough boys for the dance class, so some of the girls had to fill in. Okay. This is a 1938 article, and the little girl in the front here is B. Rodriguez, who is married to Armando Rodriguez, the doctor from San Diego State, Dr. Rodriguez, which I have. This is the garden at the Marston house. And the reason I'm showing you some of this is I want you to think about the kids coming from the barrio to this plush garden to dance, to perform, to have fundraisers. What a shock it would be. And later on, I'll talk about Laura Rodriguez, who ended up living at the Marston house. The 1922 Neighborhood House baseball team. Interesting, when you read the articles, you read about how these boys, they were a bunch of ragamuffins and they didn't know how to play baseball and blah, 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 blah. Well, they were like boys all over the country. They made their own rules. When a coach came in and said, these are the rules for baseball, they did make that transfer. Some of these boys were so good, they could have been a pro team. And in the San Diego community, the Neighborhood House team was seen like a pro. When Coach Pinkerton came to town, and I will talk more about Coach Pinkerton, he started holding these banquets for the boys, where they were being recognized for their athletic ability. The first banquet had 54 boys. Towards the end, there was over 300, and they had to discontinue them. Coach Pinkerton was wonderful to the boys. He'd take them to their house. They got in trouble, he'd go to court and testify for them. He referred them to jobs at places that were not open to them, like Roar and Combear and places like that. So he really cared about the kids in the community. And I keep those names because every once in a while, somebody will say, oh, I know who that is, or oh, that was my Theo or my cousin or something. Oscar Torres, who is well into his 80s, still has all the letters he won at Neighborhood House. I found that amazing, but it also told you that these kids did not receive the recognition they should have received at school. And many of them were not allowed to play on the teams. So he has some letters that have 4 or 5 different sports that he lettered in. But the fact that man is like 87 years old and still has this put away tells you a lot about the value. When I first read about the maids course, I had a fit. How dare they get these girls and make them into maids and blah, blah. I had my own fight within myself. Nobody was arguing with me, I was arguing with myself. Then I came across this picture of how proud the girls were, and I had to look at it differently. This was a job. This was a job in homes where they were treated basically most of the time fairly well, and they had a chance to make money for their families. So I had to do a switch on how I viewed the maids class.
Around Cats, and I'll tell you a story.
What the heck is that?
I don't know.
Okay, I can't show. Anyway, this is Babe Cesenia. Babe Cesenia played baseball at Neighborhood House. That's where he started. And he got called to go to the minors, and he was very excited. And in those days, you had to buy your own equipment. So the family had this big party, and they gave him the bats and the this and the that. And when he got to where he was going, and they realized he was Mexicano, they put him on the next train back to San Diego. And that was his end of his baseball career.
Around Cats, and I'll tell you a story about how to become an all-American boy. Buy you a guitar, put it in tune, you be rocking and rolling, son. Impressing the girls, taking hot licks, and all that jazz.
I have no idea where that came from. Okay, this is Tina Hernandez. Tina is still alive. Tina is still alive today. Right now she lives in Colorado because her niece took her there to live with her. And Tina, in 1939, played softball. Now, first of all, look at the outfit. You know that was so risque. Okay? Then her mother had a fit because, ¿qué van a decir los hombres si sabes jugar béisbol y no sabes hacer tortillas? What will the men say if you know how to play baseball and you don't know how to make tortillas? Now, Tina is a little lady. I don't think she's any Gracia size, a little tiny lady. And she puts her hands on her hips and she says, I learned how to play baseball and I learned how to make tortillas. She's really proud of that fact. Spunky lady, she had it very rough. Both her and the next slide, Mrs. Estrada, neither woman ever had their parents watch a game, because it was so unfeminine to go and play baseball. Mrs. Estrada would put her shorts on under her skirt and go off and play baseball. And her parents had a fit. Her brother was actually the coach, but she was not to play baseball because it wasn't something girls did. The boys went to camp and the girls went to camp. Look at the boys. And again, I want to talk a little bit about, the boys left the house to go to Neighborhood House at 8 o'clock in the morning. And they went to Neighborhood House. They went over to the cannery. They got into everything and anything they could. And nothing was said to them. The girls, if they were going to Neighborhood House for a cooking class or a sewing class, and if the class was at 9 and over at 10, they had to be home by 10 after 10. Girls were not allowed to go, what would you get into them? ¿Qué van a decir los vecinos? What will the neighbors say if you're out there on the street talking to people instead of home? The girls went to camp as well, but interesting enough, in a lot of the cases, their mothers went with them because, it wasn't good for a girl to be without somebody to take care of her. The singing mothers of Neighborhood House, I'm going to talk to you a lot about these ladies. They performed at Neighborhood House, they performed at the garden parties for the Marstons, and they performed sometimes at San Diego High or at Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. See the little lady on the end woman? I know there's a thing, but I don't know how to use it. She's standing on a box. She was a little dwarf, and her name was Lupita, and if you grew up in the Heights, up until the 80s, 70s, I was student teaching there, and I knew Lupita. Lupita was a friend of the boys, and the boys tormented her. I'll talk a little bit more about her. But she worked at Neighborhood House from the time she got out of school until she retired at age 65. So she really was part of Neighborhood House. Also, the circus came, and the Mexican circus would come to Logan Heights. They came up through El Paso this way. They'd go to LA, and their last performance in California was San Diego. They would come back to San Diego, and the circus offered to buy her from her mother. and her mother refused to sell her. Okay, they wanted, you know, another little dwarf because they had dwarfs. Look at how the boys were dressed, and you know they thought they were cool. Okay, look at the shoes, and I'm going to talk about the shoes for a minute. The boys who are wearing taps on their shoes. The cops had pliers in their car, and they could stop the boys and take their taps off. And of course, these were kids that were playing, because you know their parents were not going to pay to have taps put on their shoes. So they would get a job and pay for, you know, a little odd job, pay for their taps, only to have them removed by the police. Also, it wasn't unusual for the boys to end up being beat up by the cops over at Fenton. If you were going to the lumber yard, that was it. You don't want me to take you to the lumber yard. It was understood what would happen to you at the lumber yard. Frank Banuelos. Frank worked at Neighborhood House as a young man, you know, a teenager, and then worked there coaching. He's probably, I can't prove this, but I think he's really the first Latino hired for a boys athletic from the city of San Diego. And he was working at the boys club next to Memorial Junior High School. One night, him and his African-American assistant director are locking up, and the cops come by and decide these two stole these keys. They could not possibly have, you know, these keys couldn't possibly belong to them. And when Frank told them, no, you know, we work here, I'm the director, they kind of, yeah, sure you are, and took them downtown, where a sergeant recognized them and let them go. I included this, the Aztec Brewery, and the reason I included this is because a lot of activities happen there, but more important than that, all the beautiful paintings from the Aztec Brewery can be seen at the Logan Heights Library. And I want to urge anybody that has not seen the gorgeous paintings that are housed at the Logan Heights Library to take a trip over there just to see them. The community was always grateful to Neighborhood House, and a lot of times when something needed to be done, such as work on the playground, or when they made the adobe building in the back, one of the ladies remembers that they dried the bricks for the adobe right there in the back of the Neighborhood House. Now, I read how the union had a fit that guys were making their own bricks, but nevertheless. Coach Pinkerton. Coach Pinkerton was loved by those boys, and as I said earlier, this is Rachel Ortiz presenting Coach Pinkerton with an award. Coach did a lot for the kids. He was always looking out for them. To him, it was very important that the boys get a chance to be exposed to other things. And I don't know if he didn't drive, but everything the boys remember was you would get on a bus and you would go wherever he was taking you, whether it was his house to a barbecue, or you'd walk to Memorial's playground to play a baseball game. But there was never a talk of driving anywhere with the coach. Mary Barrios. Mrs. Barrios is still alive. She's not as spunky as she was 2 years ago when I interviewed her. But she remembers when the World War II broke out, she had come out of the shower and her sister came running in to announce there had just been Pearl Harbor had just been attacked, and that she and the rest of the family sat around the radio listening. Another reason I have Mary here is her family ended up with a little boy, which they all called their brother. But the fact is that a lady who was working at the cannery, a young woman from Mexico, had a child out of wedlock. And in those days, you did not go home with an unwed mother. So when it was time for her to return to Mexico, she gave the child to the Barrios family. You know how hard it must have been to just give up your child and leave? But again, the mores were, you couldn't possibly go home and not be a virgin. So giving away your child made you a virgin again. Okay, Mrs. Barrios showed me this tiny little picture of her mother, who is one of the singing mothers of Neighborhood House. But she did not know her mom was one of the singing mothers of Neighborhood House. I told her, I said, oh, I've seen that picture before. And she said, where? And I said, it's on the tiles over at Cesar Chavez Park. And so her granddaughter took her to see him. And she was shocked to find out that her mother had performed. And the women all made their traditional dresses themselves. This is Manuel Tortilla Ojeda. For those of you that know Connie and Nick Hernandez, That's one of Connie's uncles. Let me tell you a little bit about him, or about Tortilla's army. Tortilla's army was going to defend the barrio against the Japanese invasion, which sounds really funny when you think of a group of kids between 5 and 15. But if you think about San Diego during World War II, everything was the Japanese are going to invade San Diego. There was bunkers off Point Loma, the warships that you could see in Coronado. So there was constant, you're going to get bombed, for sure San Diego's the target, blah, blah. So these boys made their own army. They had maneuvers. They did not have money to buy boots, so they took black shoe polish and colored their leg all the way up to their ankles with the black shoe polish so it would look like boots. They made guns out of slingshots, and they marched. But to me, the cutest thing they did, they dug a trench around Lowell School, which is now Perkins School, because they wanted to make sure if there was an invasion of the Japanese, they could defend their school. Now these are young kids. Look or Like, and I don't know which magazine ran a story on them, and I have not been able to find it. I've tried to find it over and over again, because I understand there is a picture of Tortilla and his little army. This is a few of the workers from the cannery, and the ladies at the cannery, they became really active in the late 30s. Up to then, men had kind of worked canneries, with a few women sprinkled in. But the closer we got to the war, the more women became active in the cannery. The cannery was a well-paying job. A whistle would blow throughout the neighborhood, and you know that meant the fishing boat had come in. Go out there and you're going to work. Again, the Singing Mothers of Neighborhood House, just showing the whole group, and Lupita. Lupita, I said the boys tormented her, and they did. There's no other word for it, tormenting her. For example, there were showers at the neighborhood house, and the showers were a big deal because they had hot water. You weren't taking a bath in a tina in the kitchen. You were in a shower with hot and cold water. And so one night, the boys decided that they wanted to shower after playing basketball. And Lupita said, no, I'm not. Oh, we promise we'll take a 2-minute shower. So in they go for their 2-minute shower that came probably more like 10 minutes, and she was so mad. But she, again, a young woman would not have gone in to get these little boys out of the shower. So she had to put up with them taking as much time as they wanted. What Lupita had in her possession was the keys to every game. I'm not touching it, it's moving. The keys to every game that the boys wanted to play. She had a ring of keys. So what she really had was the power of the keys. If the boys teed her off, she would not give them a key, so they couldn't get to their baseball equipment or their games or whatever. The cops would put a 2x4 under the car to see if it had been lowered, if it was too low. If the 2x4 fit, it was okay. Now the boys would use a pack of cigarettes for their measurement, so you can see that there was a bit of conflict. This is Brother Martin and B. and Armando Rodriguez. Brother Martin is still alive. He lives in an abbey in Oregon. We visited him this past summer. He is very, very spunky at 93. Yeah, he walks with a walker. But he also will tell you that in 1936, and in 1942, this happened. He lives in a monastery, but during World War II, he won a Silver Star. And one of the things he told us was that he was short, so whatever the bunker was that was obstructing him, he said other guys would get up and aim and try to shoot. He would just get up to a certain level and just shoot. Whatever he would hit, but he wasn't about to expose himself to all those bullets flying. But he also had an interesting comment. He said, once you see a man's eyes when you kill him, you don't want to kill again, which I thought was a very profound statement. This is Emma Lopez. Emma learned to dance at Neighborhood House. And this is how you will see a change in things. Emma loved dancing. She even helped teach other kids how to dance through the Neighborhood House. Why is it moving on that? Anyway, she absolutely loved teaching the dance classes. But her mother, where, right here? These two, okay. Okay. But her mother made her quit dance classes because she was showing her ankles, okay? So she begged, she cried, everything, but she was not allowed to continue the dance classes. Her yeah, you tell me it's easy. Her parents owned the, yeah, no, right there, I'm fine. Her parents owned the Neighborhood House Cafe, and it's interesting because it's kind of between Neighborhood House, it's going towards downtown, the building is still there, and the soldiers, when they were going off to World War II, for whatever reason, really seemed to want their picture taken. Maybe it was a piece of home they were taking with them, but they wanted their picture taken in front of the Neighborhood House Cafe. It meant something to them. Brother Martin tells stories of when he was on the ship. The minute you would find out somebody came from the Heights, you would look that person up and sit and talk late into the night about who married who and who was going where and what was going on in the community. It was their way of getting together at that time. Tuli and Joe Trejo. Tuli Trejo, in my opinion, is an amazing woman. She won her first bake-off with a cake at Neighborhood House when she was 10. She went on to win the Pillsbury Bake-Off 6 times. She's an amazing lady, but mostly I find her amazing because she's a survivor. And the reason I call her that is, this is my words for her mother, and I want it very clear, it's not hers. I would call her mother an abuser. Okay, and it could be because the way she was treated by her husband. There's a lot of variables. When the husband would start beating up the mom, Tuli would run to the fire station, and those of you that know Logan Heights, it's over by Chicano Park, she would run over there to get help for her mom. And of course, that only made her father that much more angry. Also, her mom just didn't allow books in the house. If you were reading a book, you weren't working. So there was no books in the house. Tuli would go under the house to read. And she would read, she loved reading. One time her aunt gave them comic books, her brother and her, and they're reading them. Her mother took them all and burned them in the wood-burning stove. So when I tell you books were not allowed in that house, they really were not. This is Tuli today with Rita, this is at the book signing. Tuli wanted to be a nurse. The Neighborhood House ran a class that said, you know, who would like to be a nurse? And if you're interested in being a nurse, you come on Saturdays, and several young girls signed up, and they all wanted to be nurses. Well, what happened with Tuli was her mother, after she went to 2 classes, and then her mother found the book. And the book had, of course, the male anatomy. And so that was it. She had to quit going to school, her nursing school. And that's where, you know, they were like 13 years old, 14, learning how to put bandages on. And they did do tonsillectomies in the kitchen at Neighborhood House, which, can you imagine today saying, we're going to use the kitchen to do a tonsillectomy? But in those days, it was accepted. I mean, now the lawsuits would be coming immediately. Tuli's mother, now this is what I call karma. Tuli's mother, because they were poor, there were 16 kids and they were really poor. And her mother was really hard on the boys and the girls. I mean, before she would beat the boys, she'd make them get in the hot shower, in a bathtub, and then she'd hit them nude so that their skin was, you know, that type of thing. She would also, one time, took the mother, her daughter, one of the other girls, and because she had done something, burned her hand on the comal till it was 3rd-degree burns. Just burned it. Tuli nursed this little girl back to health, and her sister tells me, I loved it because that's the only time I ever had affection from anybody. We didn't get it from our parents. So Tuli paying attention to me and bandaging my hand meant so much to me. Again, things that we cannot imagine. Tuli's mother got a job at the cannery, and as I said, that was one of the best paying jobs there was in the community. Now, it was also one of the smelliest jobs in the community, and they all dressed in what looked like a nurse's uniform. Those of you who grew up in San Diego and in the 50s and 60s got on a bus, you remember the ladies from the cannery. Her mother got a job at the cannery and was doing quite well. She bought a stove, she bought a refrigerator, bought a bed. So they were starting to progress a little bit. Let me mention, the father was in and out of the home. He had various friends. So sometimes he was home and sometimes he was living somewhere else. And anyway, she got this job. Well, her brothers, there was a Pepsi-Cola company, one night broke into the Pepsi-Cola company and stole less than a case of soda, but they stole sodas. When they went to court, the judge made the mother quit her job. She had to quit her job because you're not doing your job as a mother, you're not supervising these boys, and so you will stay home and take care of them. So I kind of feel like that was poetic justice, but it was horrible for the family. Dewey got married in high school, and she had been dating this, again, she moved out of her home to live with the girlfriend and the girlfriend's mother because things were so bad at home. And she had been dating this man named Joe Trejo, who wanted to get married, but her big goal was to finish high school. She didn't care what else she did. She wanted to finish high school. So she was not about to get married, except then the war came, and then she told her friends, well, if Joe asked me, the next time Joe asked me to marry him, I'm going to marry him. They went to Yuma and got married, and then later were married in the rectory at Our Lady of Guadalupe. The one thing that I think is so important is that Dewey made the best mother because I think she was so determined not to be like her mother. She has 5 girls, all college educated, all professional. And she's always said, Joe and I did this, Joe and I did that. So it was a real job of working together. However, the high school, she had to drop out of high school because in those days, and I'm sure this is not something you guys can even relate to, if you were married, you might talk about sex, and God forbid you talk about sex to your girlfriends. So they took you out of school. So she had, I can see some of your faces. So she had to leave school because she had gotten married. She wanted that high school diploma, so I decided that, I'd go to the principal of San Diego High and say, the lady's 90 years old, can we please give her a diploma? The principal thought it was a wonderful idea. So we got ready to give Dewey a diploma, but we didn't know there was a law in California that, yes, the men who went off to war could be given a diploma, but the women could not get a diploma. So the principal was very nice, Gretchen. I'm sorry, I can't remember her last name. She made a diploma just for Dewey. And this diploma hangs in Dewey's living room today. Dewey is 93 years old, and that tells you how much that diploma meant to her. As I said earlier, she won many cooking contests, and always would share either her cooking knowledge or with the neighbors, with someone. She was constantly sharing. Did exhibitions at the Del Mar Fair. She really blossomed after the way she grew up. Coach Pinkerton, as I said earlier, Coach Pinkerton, this is a ribbon that was won in 1954, as you can see, by George Vasquez for tennis. That time, I didn't touch anything and it ran off, but I'll go back a minute here. Coach Pinkerton brought tennis to the community. Up until then, the boys, tennis was a white man's sport, and they didn't know how to play tennis, and who was going to play tennis? And the funny part is they all thought it was so easy. Oh, that's not a real sport. You just hit the ball back and forth. Anybody can do that. Then they took lessons, and they realized how difficult it was. But probably more important than that, they went to play later at Morley Field, but this is Ruben and Marcos. This is Marcos. The next fight will be of Ruben. They won championships throughout the Southwest. Ruben, when they went to the La Jolla Country Club to play a team, and of course everybody knew that neighborhood house. Those boys dressed in just white T-shirts and whatever short they could find. There's no way they were going to beat the boys from La Jolla. Well, they did. The neighborhood house team won. Now, the interesting thing, though, Ruben is going to the bathroom. He's walking, and they mistake him for one of the servers and ask him to please bring him a Coke, because what the Mexicans that were at the La Jolla Tennis Club were servers. This is Al Johnson. He was the owner of El Carrito. El Carrito restaurant is still there, of course, no longer owned by the Johnson family. The reason I have Al Johnson is because he sponsored a lot of the social clubs. I mean, a lot. And I'm going to talk about the social clubs because the social clubs was the community's answer to the suit-suiters. Because there had been so much negative publicity about the suit-suiters that the social clubs came into being. The streetcar went down Logan Avenue. Los Gallos. This is a group of boys. Do you recognize any of the people in that picture? I really don't expect you to, except the guy in the middle is Salvador Queso Torres, and those of you who are familiar with art. Okay? The group Los Gallos started. On this side is Tati, who is Tuli's brother, by the way, and that is Richard Romo, who's quite an artist and had a place in Balboa Park for a long time. The social clubs took over what the neighborhood house had been doing in many ways. They started sponsoring movies for the little kids. They started, and most of the social clubs carried a card that said, you have just been helped by a member of Los Gallos, or Los Chicanos, or Los Lobos. That's the three main. And this was for positive reinforcement. To be real honest, the boys also show, if they saw a cute girl and they thought they could get away with, let me give her my name, they would hand that card out then too. But at least, there was a method to the madness. When they went to Sacramento, a lady wrote about them and she said, if you saw these boys coming down a dark alley, you would cross the street. And, I guess it's the ducktail. I couldn't figure out where that came from. But then she said, when they realized what these kids knew about keeping kids busy and keeping kids out of trouble, they were all shocked. And it was a conference on preventing juvenile delinquency. Emma talks about how she would get off the streetcar because during World War II, and talk about a mixed message to girls, the girls were encouraged to go to the USO dances, were encouraged to go to the Pacific Ballroom and dance with the soldiers. But that's it. You dance and you come home. You don't give them your phone number. You don't even use your last name. You just, as a patriotic American, you're going to dance with them and then come home. But Dewey remembers that the suit-suiters would be at the bus stop, and she'd get off and Emma, and say, hey, hi, Emma, can we walk you home? And they would walk her home, and she always felt safe. So it's a different view of the suit-suiters than what you read in the paper. This is from the mural of Laura Rodriguez. And to be really honest with you, I wasn't going to talk about Laura because I figured the whole world knows about Laura. And then I thought, no, the new generation doesn't really know about Laura. So I thought I should bring up a few things. Laura was my personal friend. I was like 20 years old when I met her, and she was 50. And I used to think of her as La Viejita del Barrio. Obviously, she doesn't sound so old now. Laura had a very difficult childhood. Her mother abandoned her, and her father became blind. He would sell newspapers on the corner, and it was Laura's job to take him to his post where he was going to sell the newspapers, leave him there, then she would go on to school at Memorial, and then come back. Well, he knew he was very ill, and so he decided he needed to make provisions for his girls when he died. And Laura personally told me this story. They went on a train to Los Angeles. He was going to leave them in an orphanage. Well, they cried so much on their way up there that he couldn't leave them. So he brings them back on the train. They had a brother. The brother was in a juvenile facility for ditching school. He had 2 years in a facility because he did school. That's one thing I found. There was a lot of cases like that where the boys, little minor infractions, and they were given 2, 3, 4 years in a juvenile facility. Anyway, when they came back, Mr. Gallo, Laura's dad, told Mary Marston about how he had taken those girls, how he couldn't leave them. And she said, don't worry, when something happens to you, we'll take the girls in. So when Mr. Gallo died, Laura and her sister went to live at the Marston house. Now, I often think about this because can you imagine going from a little house in the barrio to living in the mansion in the Marstons, doing at your house where you did everything, and going to the Marstons where you had servants, and the parties, and I just can't even imagine getting your head around that. When I tell you Laura was spunky, Laura had a mouth on her you wouldn't believe, and she could also talk, as she did when she received the points of light, to the President of the United States. Laura was very good at functioning in all worlds. One time, she went to a little store there in the barrio. It wasn't Mike's, I'll make it that much clear. And she started to complain because the cabbage was way past due. And she said, you know, why are you selling this? You wouldn't sell it in another community. You just think it's good enough for the Mexicans. And the guy said, that's it. It's good enough for the Mexicans. So then Laura threw the cabbage at him. And by this time, Laura's well into 60s, okay? And ran out the door, ran over to Irma Castro's house and said, the police are going to come and get me, so I'm going to wait here. The cops did not show up. But, you know, again, this tells you about Laura. Laura laid in front of the bulldozers during Chicano Park, okay? Now, by then, she's 60-some years old, and she's laying in front of a bulldozer. This is Laura. There was a picket on child pornography, and we marched from the neighborhood house downtown to some of those, this is before, you know, all the beautiful stuff happened downtown, and so it was one of those raunchy stores that had adult pornography and child pornography. And we're walking this way, and we walk this way, and Laura's behind me, and then I turn and there's no Laura. And so she's inside the building, calling the man that owned the building inside the store every name in the world. And so I go in to get her, and he tells me, get her out of here or I'm going to have her arrested. And I said, come on, we got to get out of here. You're going to go to jail. And she turned to that man and she said, you know, I already called the chief this morning, and I told him to make room for me because I'm planning to go to jail, and blah, blah, blah. And she just went off on him, and he kept saying, you get her out of here. So finally, I literally had to drag her out of there. But she did leave. But she, again, those women were spunky, they were strong. And that's why we have women that we have today, because how strong these women were. When the occupation of the clinic took place, and that's something, it was taken over by a group, and I'll show you that in a minute. But I want to just say, nothing was beneath Laura. Laura would scrub toilets, and you could smell pine sol 3 blocks away, or Clorox, whichever one she was using that day. But she would also mix with the doctors and everything. Laura did everything. When the alarm would go off at night from the clinic, and it would go off sometimes just because it was a cheap alarm and that's what they could afford, and Laura would take Bianco, this big white German shepherd, and go to the clinic. She'd put her robe on, her jacket on over her pajamas, and there she'd go. And she would open the door and let the dog go in first, and then she would go in. Now, God forbid those cops took too long to get there, because they would then be given a lecture on why they took so damn long to get here and somebody could have happened and blah, blah, blah. And you know, her daughter and I started saying, you know, Laura, maybe you shouldn't go, maybe, you know, blah, blah. And her first line was, well, nobody wants an old bag. So then we took a different approach. You know, it could be dangerous, you don't know. No, she wasn't having it. She, until she got sick and could not walk, considered her job monitoring the clinic. Today, Laura has a school named after her, which I think is quite an accomplishment. They had poster dances. This is one of the groups. Poster dances, and you can see it cost almost 75 cents to get in there. Again, sponsored for the money using to do things for the kids in the community. They also had what they called garage dances. And garage dances, it was measured by, how much you paid was by the size of your waist. So if your waist was a 20-inch waist, you paid 20 cents. If it was a 40-inch, you paid 40. And one of the persons that used to perform at these garage dances was Rosie, the lady who sang Angel Baby. they started, the girls developed a group called the Shebas, and they started joint activities with the boys. The only problem is, like many activities that we do with men, they wanted the girls' job to bring the food. They would take care of the real business, and the girls were to bring the food. This just shows a picture. Now, these are the Shebas, and I think you would be surprised if I named some of those ladies there. Okay. This is La Verdad. La Verdad is a paper that was run by Richard Saenz, Carlos Legrete, and Tina Camarillo, Tommy's daughter, was that age. This is the takeover of Chicano Park, and the lady over there in the white sweater with the purse, that's yours truly. The murals, now the murals, you know, are renowned murals. They're on the National Registry. But they started off with just a few here and there, and I'm really proud. Now this is when the neighborhood house was taken over, and the reason I consider this really quite important is because the older people in the community remembered neighborhood house when it offered the services of the doctor and when it offered referral services. And as it became administrators' offices and the services went to different parts of the community, that brought quite a change. There's a discrepancy over who, I'm going to show you Armando in a minute, over who got the keys to the building that night. I remember Laura getting the keys. Mike Nava says he's the one who got the keys. And I'm not sure enough to say, yes, it was Mike, or yes, it was Laura. Somebody got the keys to the building under the pretext that there was a meeting there. And that night, a group of people, mostly brown berets, took over the neighborhood house meeting. I, as a college student, and because Jose Gomez and Laura were very protective of me, was told not to be inside the building, but to go to the Community Action Council, where they were holding a regular meeting, and to see how people reacted. So like a tonta, and I do mean a tonta, I took a tape deck. Everybody walks into a meeting with a tape deck. I mean, I wasn't thinking it. I was trying to be discreet, but I walked in with a tape deck to record how people reacted. L. Johnson was the chairman then, the same L. Johnson you saw earlier, and he didn't have any big reaction, and I couldn't figure out why. But later I realized him and Mike and people like Laura, they all remembered when neighborhood house was for the community. So they may not have approved of the method, but they approved of what was being done. That's that conclusion I came to. This is my dear friend, Dr. Armando Rodriguez. Armando's 96 now, but I want to tell you a real quick story about Armando. When he was wrestling at neighborhood house, they went to a wrestling match in Los Angeles at the Los Angeles Athletic Club. And the boys were not allowed to go in the front door. They had to go in through the kitchen. Now this is the late 30s, early 40s. So they went in through the kitchen so they could participate in this activity. In the 70s, when Armando became a commissioner on the Equal Opportunity Commission, when they asked him where he wanted to have his party, he decided to have it at the LA Athletic Club. And as he says, this time we walked in the front door. Okay, I'm going to stop now because I know it's almost time for your class to be over, but do you have any questions or anything, any comments or anything you'd like to say? Okay, well, thank you so much. I'm going to hang around. I only brought a few books because I wasn't sure how many of you would be interested in purchasing them. They're $30. And thank you for being such a nice audience and listening.
So let's start. Anybody have any questions about the history of Barrio Logan or the history of Neighborhood House? Any questions about it? How many of you are familiar with Neighborhood House or have been into Barrio? Yeah. Okay, a few of you. Good. One of the questions I have is, what's happening today in the neighborhood that you see, especially with the
Gentrification.
with the gentrification of the area? I mean, we are talking about some of the best property in San Diego, some of the best weather in San Diego, and of course that's going to be drawing in developers. What do you see at this time in Banuelo? What gives you hope that you see that's going on?
Hope, I don't know about hope. It's a mixed bag as far as I'm concerned, because if you have property and you want to sell it, I certainly believe that you should have that right to sell it. But I also would hate to see the feeling and the flavor of the community take such a big change. And that's what you are seeing. These days it's looked at as beachfront property. I didn't talk about Caquita Beach, but Caquita Beach was over by where 28th Street, and what was there was a cesspool, a pipe from the sewer that came right, and that's where the kids learned to swim. Okay, that tells you a lot about what their life was. And now, of course, that's all changing, and there's new condos. I'm aware of several properties that went for $1 million. Who would ever think that $1 million, but you can see the ballpark, you can see the ocean, you can see Coronado. It's a big change. So I see that, and I also see the threat to Chicano Park by the neo-Nazis.
Yeah.
I think that's, to me, one of the most frightening things. Forget the gentrification and all that. The fact that you have to guard these beautiful murals because they threaten to destroy them, to me, is frightening. Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead, please.
You mentioned earlier that the older generation in Barrio Logan don't like people to refer it as Barrio Logan. Why is that?
I think because they grew up when it was called Logan Heights, and there's a lot of sentimental value to the Heights. Logan Heights, La Logan, all of those. When the title to my book came from the boys when they were asked, where are you going? Vamos a la neighbor. It wasn't we're going to neighborhood, vamos a la neighbor. So a lot of it, I think, is pride from the old days, you know, and it's about saying the word barrio. This is not, you know, we were a community. And they also talk about people had a lot of pride in taking care of their houses, the florecitas. The ladies had flowers in their yard, which the boys then stole and went and sold them to the sailors downtown so they could give them to their girlfriends. But it was a community, so I think that's part of it. Okay. Thank you so much for being here. Very much appreciated. Thank you.
Hi. Olivia, you two, get over here.
People to teach. People to teach.
Olivia, Quintanilla. Tish. I gotta remember the last name.
T-shirts.
Get over here, girl.
You're getting bigger. 1, 2, 3.
Got it?
And whoever